Who is this I see? Perhaps the young lady in this portrait is highly educated and comes from a respectable family. I bet she's fallen deeply in love with a refined young man with ambitious pursuits who dotes on her every whim. Or maybe not. Hey guys, it's Nik the Booksmith. Welcome back. Sorry I have been away. I've been very sick, and as you can tell, my voice is still not back. I hate laryngitis. I've had this for over 2 weeks now, so hopefully my voice will come back, but until then, I guess you'll have to put up with my 19th century coal miner with black lung voice. It's kind of sexy, right? I have a craft time mystery story to tell you while I make this miniature sketchbook, so grab a seat. Brunhild Paulsdatter Storseat was born on November 11th, 1859. She was the youngest of 8 children, and her family lived near Selbu in central Norway. Not a lot is known about Brunhild as a child, but when she was about 21, she followed her older sister Nellie to the United States. Once she was there, she assumed a more American-sounding name, which was Belle, and worked as a house servant. It wasn't long before Belle met and married Mads Sorensen. He was a night watchman at a department store. 2 years later, they opened a grocery and notion store, but the business struggled to take off, and within a year, the shop mysteriously burned down. Fortuitously, they would collect on the insurance, which paid for a new home. As luck would have it, that home would burn down too. And then another one as well. The couple would have to move several times while living in Chicago, but thankfully because of the consistent supply of insurance money, they weren't under much financial hardship. Now there is some inconsistency when it comes to whether or not Belle and Mads had children. Some say there were no children, while others would say the couple had 4 children. One source said that all the children were probably adopted from neighbors in Chicago that couldn't take care of them. And I gotta say, that is a rather huge discrepancy. They either had no children at all, or they had 4? No in between? That just seems genuinely odd to me. So I did some digging. As of June 13th, 1900, the U.S. Census records Mads and Belle, or Bella, Sorensen with 2 daughters, and 1 adopted daughter named Jenny Olsen. I figured there was a combination of biological children and adopted. Regardless of the actual parentage of the kids, at one point prior to the summer of 1900, there were 4 children named Caroline, Axel, Myrtle, and Lucy. But I hear you asking, what happened to Caroline and Axel? Well, with great sadness, I regret to inform you that the first 2 children died very young of acute colitis, the symptoms being nausea, fever, diarrhea, and lower abdominal pain. Coincidentally, these are the exact same symptoms caused by many forms of poisoning. Fun fact, both Caroline and Axel's lives were reportedly insured, and those policies paid out upon their death. But misfortune and calamity was not done with Belle, because on July 30th, 1900, her beloved Mads would also succumb to death. But serendipitously, that July 30th happened to fall on the last day of one insurance policy and the first day of the new one. And so Belle, our grieving widow, was able to collect on not just 1, but 2 insurance policies, equaling nearly $300,000 in today's money, which I'm sure helped Belle ride out the grief caused by her husband's early demise. Mads' family found all this business rather suspicious. However, the doctor who had been treating Mads concluded that he died from heart failure. So, nothing to see here. Belle claimed that Mads had come home with a headache, so she gave him some quinine powder. Then, oh my gosh, the next thing she knew, her husband was dead. Soon after, Belle left Chicago with her daughters, Myrtle and Lucy, and adopted daughter, Jenny. With her newly acquired funds, she bought a 48-acre farm in LaPorte County, Indiana. You know, it's just what she needed, a fresh start. Belle was described as incredibly strong, at least 5'9" in height and well over 200 pounds. Even so, she decided she didn't want to run her farm alone and soon married the newly widowed Peter Gunness. a fellow Norwegian immigrant, on April 1st, 1902. Just 1 week later, the baby girl Peter brought with him into the marriage died mysteriously while home alone with Belle. And then, later that year in December, Peter also met with tragedy. Not Peter. According to Belle, he was reaching for his slippers while standing next to the kitchen stove when he was scalded with simmering brine. Simultaneously, part of a heavy sausage grinding machine fell from above, undoubtedly perched precariously on a wobbly shelf. This caused a fatal head injury, and sadly, Peter would be dead before sunrise. Apparently, Peter had an older daughter as well, but it wasn't long before Peter's brother would come and she would move to Wisconsin to live with her uncle's family. I'm thinking girlfriend dodged a bullet, like literally. Peter's death netted Belle another $3,000 and some say $4,000, which would equal about $100,000 to $140,000 today. But locals refused to believe that he could be so clumsy. Peter had run a hog farm on the property and was known to be an experienced butcher. The district coroner reviewed the case and unequivocally announced that Peter had been murdered, and a coroner's jury was convened to look into the matter. Meanwhile, Belle's adopted daughter Jenny, who was 14, was overheard telling a classmate, "My mama killed my papa. She hit him in the head with a meat cleaver and he died. But don't tell a soul." Jenny was brought before the coroner's jury, but denied saying any such thing. Belle, meanwhile, convinced the coroner that she was innocent. She didn't mention to him that she was pregnant, which may have garnered some sympathy for her, but then maybe she didn't know it yet. And then in May of 1903, a baby boy named Philip was born. Between then and 1906, Belle continued to run the hog farm on her own. In late 1906, Belle told neighbors that her foster daughter, Jenny, had gone away to finishing school in Los Angeles. But we'll revisit Jenny later on. In 1907, Belle hired a farmhand named Ray Lamphere to help with the chores. Around the same time, she posted the following advertisement in the matrimonial columns of all the Chicago daily newspapers and some other large Midwestern cities. Personal. Comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided, with view to joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow with a personal visit. Several middle-aged men of means responded to the ad. The LaPorte postmaster commented that mail to Belle Gunness came in thick and fast. She'd collect 4 to 10 letters a day from all over the states. One of these was John Moe, who traveled from Elbow Lake, Minnesota with more than $1,000 to pay off her mortgage, or so he had told his neighbors. Belle would introduce him as her cousin, but no matter, because he disappeared within a week of his arrival. Next came George Anderson from Missouri, who, just like Peter and John Moe, was also from Norway. During dinner with George, Belle raised the issue of her mortgage that needed to be paid off. And George said that he agreed that he would pay it off if they decided to get married. Late that night, George woke up to see her looming over him, holding a barely flickering candle and a sinister, foreboding look on her face. Then, without saying a word, she turned and left the room. George, seeing this as his cue, said, no thanks, and noped the heck right out of there. It's reported he didn't even grab his belongings. He fled the house and hopped the first train back to Missouri. The suitors kept coming, but no one except for George Anderson ever left the Gunness farm. By this time, Belle had begun ordering huge trunks delivered to her home. A driver named Clyde Sturgis delivered many of these trunks, and later remarked how the heavy-set woman would lift these enormous trunks like boxes of marshmallows, tossing them onto her shoulder and carrying them into the house. Ola Budsberg, an elderly widower from Iola, Wisconsin, was the next one to come visit Belle. He was last seen at the LaPorte Savings Bank on April 6, 1907, when he mortgaged his Wisconsin land, signing over a deed and obtaining several $1,000s in cash. His sons Oscar and Matthew had no idea that their dad had gone off to visit Belle in LaPorte. When they finally figured out where he'd gone, because they found her letters, they wrote to her. Belle promptly responded, saying that she had never seen their father. In December of 1907, Andrew Helgelin, a homestead farmer from South Dakota, wrote to Belle. They would go on to exchange scores of letters. Then a letter arrived in January of 1908 that overwhelmed Andrew. It read, "To the dearest friend in the world, no woman in the world is happier than I am. I know that you are now to come to me and be my own. I can tell from your letters that you are the man I want. It does not take one long to tell when to like a person, and you I like better than anyone in the world. I know. Think of how we will enjoy each other's company. You, the sweetest man in the whole world, we will be all alone with each other. Can you conceive of anything nicer? I think of you constantly. When I hear your name mentioned, and this is when one of my dear children speaks of you, or I hear myself humming it with the words of an old love song, it is beautiful music to my ears. My heart beats in wild rapture for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever." Andrew immediately left for LaPorte, Indiana, taking with him a check for $2,900, his entire savings. Then a few days after he arrived, he and Belle appeared at the savings bank in LaPorte and deposited the check. Spoilers, that was the last time Andrew would be seen in public because he vanished within just a few days. But Belle would continue to make deposits. First, a $500 deposit, and then another one of $700. Belle was corresponding with several men during this time, a farmer in Topeka, Kansas, and a man from Arkansas, both who planned to visit her at the farm. Andrew Helgelin's brother was also writing Belle, but it wasn't to woo her with promises of paying off her mortgage. He was furiously questioning her about where the heck his brother was. And what was so funny is that she would write him back saying, "Oh, I don't know where your brother is, but why don't you travel out here to visit me and we'll look for him together? But don't forget to bring money." You guys, you cannot make this up. She says, "Searching is expensive, so don't forget to bring money when you come so we can search for your brother and find him." Like, wow. Talk about a one-track mind. It was about this time she started having problems with her farmhand, Ray Lamphere. Apparently, he had romantic feelings for Belle and was becoming very jealous of all the men who were coming to seek her hand in marriage. I guess he wouldn't stop making a scene every time someone would come around, and Belle told him to leave in February of 1908. Then she went into town to an attorney's office, and she told the attorney, "That man is out to get me. I fear one of these nights he will burn my house to the ground." Then she wanted to make out a will in case Ray went through with these threats. In the will she drafted, she left her property to her children, or in the event of their death, to the Norwegian Orphans' Home. The Norwegian Orphans' Home? Yeah, that's what the attorney thought too. And when he suggested to Belle that that could not be the official name, and that he needed a day or two to get the official name before he could authorize the will, Belle contested. She said that this kind of business could wait to be completed after the fact and that they needed to sign that will immediately. She told him there was no time to wait. He finally relented and signed his name next to hers. That night, the house on Gunness Farm burned to the ground. 4 bodies were found inside the remains of the farmhouse. One of the bodies was that of a woman, but they were having trouble identifying who it was. And not because it was burned really badly, but it was because it didn't have a head. The other 3 bodies were identified as the Gunness children, Myrtle, Lucy, and Philip. But it was the headless body that was of the most growing concern to the local residents. Mr. Christofferson, who was a neighboring farmer, took one look at the body and said, yeah, that's not Belle. Also a Mr. Nicholson, who was another neighbor, and Mrs. Cutler, an old friend of Belle's, said the same thing. Doctors took measurements, and after allowing for the missing head, stated that the corpse was that of a woman who originally stood approximately 5'3" tall, weighing no more than 150 pounds. Since the body was barely scorched, detailed measurements were taken, and they were compared with those that were on file with several LaPorte dressmaking stores where Belle would purchase her clothing. And the authorities concluded that this body could not possibly have been Belle Gunness. Regardless, when a piece of dental bridge work was found in the ashes, Belle's dentist, Ira Norton, said it was work that he was sure he had done for Belle. And as a result, Coroner Charles Mack officially concluded that the headless body was Belle Gunness. I guess it was just easier for him that way. The brother of Andrew Helgelin did show up, and he insisted that something really bad had happened to his brother. So the sheriff took a dozen men back to the farm and began to dig. On May 3rd of 1908, the body of Jenny Olsen was uncovered. Remember the one who had gone to finishing school back in 1906? Yeah. Then they found the bodies of 2 unidentified children and the body of Andrew Helgelin. As this gruesome work continued, one body after another was discovered under the Gunness hog pen. Most of the remains could not be identified, and recovery methods at that time were crude at best, let's be honest. So the exact number of individuals unearthed on the Gunness farm is not clear. But at the time, they believed it was at least 12. One of the bodies found was assumed to be the sweetheart of Jenny Olsen, who had disappeared soon after she did. Then Belle's attorney came forward to tell his story about how Belle feared Ray Lamphere would kill her family and burn the house to the ground. This would lead to Mr. Lamphere, or Crazy-Eyed Ray as I like to call him, to be arrested on May 22nd, and he was charged with murder and arson. He denied these accusations, and he insisted that the body that they found in the house without a head was not Belle. After the trial, Ray Lamphere was found guilty of arson, but acquitted of any murder charges. So I guess the jury didn't believe that the headless body was Belle either. On November 26th, he was sentenced to 20 years in state prison for the arson charge, but he ended up dying of tuberculosis only 13 months later. On January 14th, 1910, a minister by the name of Reverend Shell came forward with information that he had learned from Ray during his dying confession. Ray claimed to know the mystery behind the headless woman found in the house fire. He said Belle had lured this woman from Chicago on the pretense of hiring a housekeeper just days before she had decided to make her escape from LaPorte. He claimed that Belle drugged, then killed the woman in the basement before removing her head. Then she dressed the body in her clothes and removed her false teeth to place beside it. She smothered the children while they slept, set fire to the house, and fled. Ray admitted she talked him into helping, but she had not left by the road where he was waiting after the fire had been set. She betrayed him by cutting across the open fields and disappearing into the woods. To the very end, he swore Belle was still living. Belle's body count will probably never be officially confirmed, but it is estimated that over 40 persons died at her hands. So, what say you? Do you think Belle died in the fire that took her children? Or do you think she got away with murder? I'll say this. They found everything else, but they never found the missing head. Accepting that someone killed Belle and took off with her head, it should have been found at some point, because none of the bodies were burned very badly at all. After reading all that Belle had done, it really doesn't take a rocket surgeon to understand what she's capable of. I mean, come on. Even if she reckoned they'd figure out sooner or later that the body wasn't her, if you ask me, it still would have given her one heck of a running start. All right, kids, that is it for this one. If you like this craft and mystery combo, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thank you all for hanging out and letting me tell you this story. Maybe my voice will be better for the next one. But yeah, thanks for putting up with me. I will see you all really, really soon in the next video. Bye, guys.